My fear is that we see the platforms as like the way we see a football club, like the only one we trust. And so we'll have a different way of seeing reality depending on what is our favorite platform. Don't you have the impression sometimes, Kuba, that platforms, including TikTok, are atomizing our societies?
Well, I would say that TikTok is pretty much a mirror of the society. So we are talking about a billion users platform globally, 100 million users globally. So if you're talking about that volume and about that numbers, then you will pretty much see a reflection of every social approach or attitude from the people. And I think that the crucial thing here is that you allow them to express themselves while balance out the competing rights, whether it comes to data privacy, freedom of expression, freedom of arm. So this is probably the biggest challenge from our point of view. But I think if I were to describe TikTok in one word, that would be authenticity, which is that you see the world that you do as a creator, and then you can express it on the platform.
Which raises also the question, for example, of the fact-checking. Something we say now about the current war in Ukraine is that it was the first TikTok war. Some call it even a meme war. You say that it's authenticity. Let me play the devil's advocate, but I have the impression as well it is also a way to banalize the war. Wars with memes, at the end, this is a very virtual war. Aren't you afraid of that? Do you think that the answer is also to give more fact-checking, for example?
Right. So I completely disagree that it's about banalizing the war. I think what we see with the war, with the Russian invasion, is that actually social media helped to put that message across from the Ukrainian government. Let's imagine the situation that there is no social media or like big platforms there that would allow you to, from your personal user experience, to present what's going on in your country during the invasion, right? That, of course, that you would have a couple of brave word journalists that would be there presenting, but would that be enough to show the volume? Also, whether the governments or the people that fight there, whether they would have such powerful tools to present their message to the world. I think the outcome could have been different if there were not social media. So I don't think we are banalizing that.
You want to react on that, maybe, Zing?
Yeah, I think in any conflict, it's not just a conflict that's being played out in terms of territory and armies moving across land, right? It's also a conflict played out in the media. And what you see happening with the Ukraine war is that Volodymyr Zelensky has made a lot of effort in continuously pushing Ukraine's interests and pushing the importance of the war in the Western media. And part of that is to do with social media. Part of it is to do with those memes. I'm sure some of you might have seen them. It's like Zelensky as Captain America and stuff like that. These are all memes that keep the kind of consciousness in the West, at least, of what's happening in Ukraine alive. And without that kind of Western attention and pressure, it also means that, Putin can get away with what he wants.
Mm-hmm. No, it's true that some say that information is the first victim in the war, is one of them at least. Zing, let's speak a bit about the content as well. You're a content creator, as we say today. For me, you are a writer. You write texts, you put them online, you also write books, as I said. And here, maybe there is a conflict as well with platforms. The way, a producer of milk can see Tesco is maybe the way you see TikTok or Twitter or Facebook. By the way, you don't have an account on TikTok, I checked. Is it true?
I actually do, yeah.
You do?
And I'm making TikToks now for the Vice TikTok account.
Okay.
But
who is the boss now in this new bubble?
In terms of the platform or me
Yeah.
as the creator? The thing is, without content creators, the platforms would have nothing to put up. And what would be on the platforms would just be, I don't know, just like nonsense. People are really interested in journalism that I think is entertaining, educational, and to a certain extent inspiring, right? I don't think that there'll ever be a point in time in which content creators will turn around and say, we don't want to be on these platforms, we want to build these platforms. Because look, I'm not a tech expert. I would not know how to reverse engineer something like TikTok or Twitter or Instagram. What it does do is it gives me a platform to kind of put across the things that I believe in, the things that I care about, and the journalism I'm passionate about. The problem, I think, with social media platforms right now is because there's just so much information. It's really hard for people to find the voices that they can trust, find the voices who are doing due diligence in terms of the reporting, in terms of ethics. You see this happening with the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial, right? There were so many people creating TikToks about a very tricky legal case that has to do with a very certain specific aspect of American law, and you just had people acting as if it was a murder trial and someone was going to go to jail at the end of it, which was not the case. And so a lot of journalists I know were battling really hard to get the correct information about that trial out there, but they were up against this tidal wave of other creators who had jumped on board to try and misrepresent what was happening with the trial. And I'm not saying they were doing this in a malevolent way or that they were, pro-Johnny or pro-Amber or whatever. It's just because if you're a journalist, you receive training and you learn how to report on things in an ethical, unbiased, fair way, which I think, to a certain extent, some people on social media platforms don't have that background. They can learn it and they can be supported by the platform. But right now, the platform doesn't incentivize people to undertake that kind of training.
Okay, so because of the platforms, at the end, maybe the amateurs are outweighing the professionals. Is it the case, Kuba?
Amateurs outweighing the professionals. That's an interesting take. I think it comes down to what TikTok really is, right? TikTok is basically, it's an entertainment platform. TikTok is here to inspire creativity and bring joy. Now, what we see also from the marketing angle, that TikTok not necessarily works as a plug and play for the campaign. You need to learn what TikTok is. TikTok is a completely new thing out there, and you need to think in a TikTok way to be seen there, right? So I would say you can be professional, but you need to understand what TikTok is, what TikTok audience is, and the creators that are there. What we see also is that it's not, the TikTok creation and the TikToks that you work, it's not only a new genre, but we also see a completely new group of creators rising with the platform. So it's not a situation where you can easily move from other platforms and start creating on TikTok. So I wouldn't put it in a comparison like you said. I would rather say that it's
you're saying you need to be a professional clickbaiter to be on TikTok. You need to do your videos in a way that you're going to get popular. But is it to the detriment of the content, of these very specific legal aspects of American law when it came to the judgment, to the case of Johnny Depp and Amber Heard?
Amber Heard, yeah. Well, I'm a non-expert of an American law, but what I can tell you is that it's about balancing on what's on the platform, on what is important, and that the fact that safety is the top priority here, right? The content moderation, the working with the fact checkers, like that builds this combination of things that you need to take into consideration while running the platform, right? Therefore, maybe having the guidance from regulators and the law, it's not that bad, because when you're sitting behind the platform, you see what's going on there, you see the volume, and then you have the freedom of expression, you have freedom of arm, you have privacy. Then it's hard to balance out, and also the numbers, like we've talked with Zing before. It's a huge number. So let me give you one, which is we published this quarterly transparency report. And we remove 100 million videos on a quarterly basis, and this accounts for only 1% of the whole content that is out there. So now you see the volume, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true, and I admit I wouldn't like to be in your shoes when it comes to applying the current legislation, the national or the European legislation. To put yourself in the shoes of a fast-track judge must be incredibly complicated. And Zing, but do you think they should still do that? Should it be like is it for platforms we had a lot of controversy in Twitter. Is it for Twitter to decide whether Donald Trump is allowed to have an account or not? Is it for Kuba and his team to decide, what videos should be, suppressed from the platform? As a content creator, how do you see that?
I think it's only fair that platforms get regulated. I don't know what the situation is like in Hungary, but in the UK, for instance, newspapers and magazines are regulated by a press regulator called Ipso. Anybody can issue a complaint to Ipso. If you look at the BBC has its specific complaint service. Anybody can complain to the BBC about bias. So I think it's only really fair if platforms like TikTok are behaving in the same way as media companies, like a newspaper, like a BBC news channel, that it's fair that they should be open and accountable in that way. So I think that this entire idea of I think for a while, I think social media platforms kind of took a step back and they were like, we're not responsible for any of the content on our platforms. What we are is like, we're a town square. And you wouldn't go after the architect of a town square if some nut job came in and shouted there was a fire, right? It's not our problem. But I think, nowadays people are more aware of the fact that the so-called town square is actually not this neutral space in which anyone has an equal voice. Some people have outsized voices. They have huge voices. Some people have the voice that's so huge it can literally tank economies and guide nations, right? Like Donald Trump, for instance. So it's only really fair that the platforms that are giving them that power are held to account as well.
Platforms are also like electricity providers or transport providers. I would be very upset if tomorrow I get a phone call from Deutsche Telekom and say, you don't have a phone anymore because you are too conservative.
Well, I mean, isn't that what's happening in Hungary now, right? People are saying that, if you have a Russian credit card, you can't use it in certain places in Hungary. I mean, I was trying to book somewhere at the Zing Tsjeng, and they said, if you have a Russian credit card, we don't want your money. So in many ways, governments do this all the time. It's not just social media platforms that are the outlier. In many different ways, the world is full of things that actually constrain the movements and constrain the ways in which people can exercise power.
But the difference is that this specific example that you mentioned was decided by all the big governments of the European Union. This is one of the sanctions. But you are not democratically elected, Mr. TikTok. Yes.
We are not democratically elected.
You are not. So why should you take the same type of decisions?
Well, but we are not decision makers as well, right? We are not democratically elected, but we are not decision makers as well. I want to reiterate to what Zing said. Yes, there was a time for tech platforms where they were saying, we're just behind it, we're just giving you the platform to speak, and we're not responsible for that. But I think those times are gone now. Big tech platforms are now heavily scrutinized, and that's fair, that's okay. I personally think TikTok is probably the most scrutinized platform for a number of reasons now, and that's also okay. This just pushes us to do our job better. And just to give you an example, other tech platforms, there are different teams within an organization, and one that is particularly important is trust and safety. So they do the content moderation and etc. on the platform, and it took those other big tech platforms 10 years before they started creating trust and safety teams. While TikTok started with creating trust and safety team, and this is by far the biggest in number team of our organization. So, there are challenges, but there's also opportunities for the platforms like platforms 2.0, like TikTok is right now, and where it's introducing, where there is a slight chance of improving the scenario, and I think we are at least trying to do that.
Mm-hmm. You're very young indeed, and again I insist to your own defense. It's the role that public authorities put upon your shoulders is very complicated, if not impossible to fulfill. I admit. I speak as a former legislator. Sorry in advance. Zing, let's speak a bit about content as well. In the digital bubble, we have the impression, we readers, that we get more opinions than facts. Yourself as an influencer or as a journalist, or are you using, some people say, so I don't want to be too controversial, but are you not an influencer disguised as a journalist?
I would describe myself as a journalist first. If I'm an influencer, that has happened completely by mistake and not by design. I think that it's like apples and oranges, right? It's like, I'm a journalist. I think the journalism I do, I would like to think is important. I would like to think should be reaching people. If it means that I have to put it in a certain way, if I need to be on social media and present myself in a certain way, if it means that the work that I do gets out to a larger audience, then I think, great. But I think the problem is when you expect influencers, like people who have not come from a journalism background, maybe haven't worked at newspapers, magazines, websites, whatever, and you hold them up to the same standard of journalism. And that's an unfair standard, right? If someone started out as a fashion influencer and suddenly pivots into being, an economics reporter, you would be like, what's the basis? What are your skills? What are your credentials? But I think what social media has done, particularly platforms like TikTok, people can be very persuasive on camera. People can cover up the fact that they might not have the credentials you need, that they might be misrepresenting the facts. You see this in the rise of, like podcasters like Joe Rogan, who are continuously misrepresenting statistics about things like domestic violence and rape. Why these people gain credibility is because they are good on camera, they have the charisma, they are able to build that kind of trust with an audience. But I think that if journalists have to present themselves in that way to get the facts out, then fair play to them.
No, true. I see exactly what you mean, especially me. I mean, I'm not even a millennial. I'm just before the millennial. So, I was born in a world without internet, where I used to read newspapers on paper.
Imagine.
And I liked it very much, and I miss it terribly. And for example, my impression is that the phenomena that you describe with Joe Rogan is sometimes the phenomenon I also see with The Guardian, for example, and with a lot of left-wing newspapers, for example. And this is where we get to this discussion on atomization of society. I used to read newspapers that were read by large audiences, and we had 3 or 4. And the charming thing is that me, with my personal opinions, I could read right-wing and left-wing newspapers. I have the impression that this doesn't happen anymore since we have in the digital world, even less with the platforms. And I'm scared. I'm scared that at the end, our societies will be an aggregation of little families, some who watch Game of Thrones on Twitter and some others who only are on TikTok and watch all the type of series. And then some dinosaurs like me.
But that's not a problem with the journalists or the people who are creating the content. Like, if a platform wanted to, it could present you with, a Game of Thrones review that was good, and then followed immediately by a Game of Thrones review that was bad, just so you could make up your own mind. Similarly with, political opinions, of opinion pieces, but that's not what social media platforms want to do, right? I mean, I think I'm right in saying that the TikTok algorithm is very advanced, and it serves you more of the content that you want to see. It builds a profile of yourself based on what you enjoy watching and what you've liked and what you saved, and it just serves you more of the same. So really, this entire idea of the atomization of society, that, opposing views aren't being heard. You can find an opposing view on the internet. You can find an opposing view to anything if you try hard enough. But the problem is how easy it is to find it on those platforms.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there's ultimately a question about rabbit holes and what do we do about them in terms of how we deal with that problem. And we do acknowledge that. And what we do on the platform, the algorithm works. Let me tell you a bit how the algorithm works. So when you start TikTok, you put a certain preferences and settings to what you want to see, right? And then the algorithm presents you with the videos that you want to watch. But the algorithm does not show you what the people want to see, right? So this is a slight difference between us and other platforms. That's one. Second, you get videos in batches, which is 5 to 7 videos, right? And now 5 of those 7 are usually within your interests, and 2 are usually out of the blue, just to see whether you are in this exploratory, serendipitous mood to check something else. And this is another thing that you do in order to avoid going deep into rabbit holes. We also introduced a reset button to the settings. So if you go too deep into certain issues and you don't feel comfortable with it, you can reset. You have a reset button. It's not even changing the settings, just the reset button, and you have it from the start. So yeah, it is a challenge, but we at least try to address it.
I've never heard this before. This is actually really interesting. So what's stopping TikTok from having more customization where, let's say I am, in a batch of videos, I'm happy to watch 3 videos that I know I'll like, that I'll agree with, but I want to up my kind of tolerance for things that I haven't encountered before. Maybe views I haven't encountered before, places I haven't seen. What's stopping TikTok from from letting me customize that? So maybe I see 1 video I know I like, then 6 videos are just completely challenging me out of my worldview.
Right. I think it's a great idea, and I wouldn't. The iteration on the algorithm and how it works and the platform. This is a constant iteration. If you turn on the app today and in 3 months' time or 3 months back, the experience is different because there are constant iterations. So I would, and there is also research on what the users actually want to do on the platform. So what we see, for example, to give you some of the numbers, so we see that this is an entertainment platform basing on the statistics that 61% of the users come there to feel energized, uplifted. They make a small break during the day. So it's not like you're sitting in the audience and you're checking the status or messages or likes under your photos. You need to be engaged on the platform, right? So this is the 61%. But what we also see is actually that I think it's close to 75%, where they are in this, what you just said, in this exploratory mood. They want to actually explore. So the more that we see the attitude from the users and creators to go that direction, that it's very possible that it will have a natural impact on the algorithm.
And that takes us also to another problem, which is the time you can spend on TikTok. But before that, another question, and then we will move to this problem. And also a reminder, there's a very lonely microphone there, and you have the occasion to raise your own questions. Don't hesitate. Feel free to shoot. I think our guests are very, very good at answering uncomfortable questions, so don't hesitate. One more uncomfortable question on my side, the content. Imagine, Zing, that one day TikTok and Facebook boycott Vice because they don't like you. Now what I hear, what a dinosaur like me hears about the new generation is that the vast majority of the news they read them on Twitter, Facebook, basically on platforms. And those platforms, the way Tesco can tell you, I don't like your cheeses, they can tell you, I don't like your news, so we kick you out from the market. And suddenly your audience will be 10 times less. Are you afraid of this dystopian scenario or not?
No, I don't think so, because when we produce content, we're producing it across multiple platforms, right? So we're not just on TikTok, we've also got a website, we also have TV production studios, we've got a movie studio. The Vice content will find a way to reach you. You might not know it's Vice, so I'm sure some of you might have seen the Fire Festival documentary. Yep, so that was a Vice production. So the Vice content finds a way of reaching its audience. And I think one of the things I would like to point out to Kuba is that one of the problems that we have is that a lot of the content that we do that's educational about sex, about drugs, how you can take drugs safely if you are into that, how you can have sex safely, a lot of that content is actually just shadow banned by places like TikTok and Instagram. It's really hard to reach audiences, even though we think it's really important because we know it's about harm reduction. Because we don't want to say to young people, we don't want to say to young people, you're all, frigid virgins, you don't like to party. We know young people like to party. We know they like to have sex. We want this information about how to do it responsibly to reach them. But sometimes what the platforms are doing in their rush to make sure everything is safe and kosher and, fine for the government or whatever, like they take that content off as a kind of overreach. So that, I think, is one of the challenges that we have, is that this information is important. We've also heard it from other content creators who are sex educators that their stories get taken off TikTok. And I think that's really unfair because it's not salacious, it's not just for pure gratification. We're trying to say something important to people. But I think that is sometimes in the overreach and the rush towards getting a purely safe platform, which I don't think is possible, really. You kind of overstep the mark.
Right. No, and I agree with you because this is the general issue of content moderation, the nuances, right? And there is the issue of over-moderations. So, for example, we do want to over-moderate in order to not let the harmful content flow. And now, sometimes you're being hostage of these nuances, like you just said. But what is important here is that when we shadow ban, where we block, where we remove the video, it's not final. Like you can contact us and you can explain the context behind it, and we might reconsider. That happened a number of times already. So I'm going to be very happy to help you with that.
I hope that this endeavor you are less ideological than Twitter, for example, which is the only one I really know. We have some questions. I think it's the right time to address them. Gentlemen, please introduce yourself. Questions more than comments, please, and go straight to the point. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, my name is Ali. I'm a senior researcher. My question is to Mr. Jakub. I would like to ask you, to what extent do you think TikTok could affect or direct people's opinion or the way how do they see the world, especially from the political point of view?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a question of algorithm, content moderation, and your preferences. I don't necessarily believe that we have an impact that the significant impact on the platform is the impact that comes from creators and actually what you want to watch, what is the new trend, etc. One thing interesting, because you said about researchers, because you are a researcher, we will be sharing an API for the researchers to actually do those kind of research on our platform very soon, to help us also, us internally, understand better what's going on and have better answers for those kind of questions.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We're going to take the question after that, because it's now the right moment also to address something else. Kuba, you mentioned before that your platform also rewards persons who are very active on it. I think that in theory, you could spend 24 hours a day on TikTok, if this was possible. And then two problems, the problem of addiction, and even more, the problem of brain, concentration, to focus, the ability to focus. Zing writes books. You even wrote series of books. So basically, I'm thinking like the whole series that you wrote must be like 1,000 pages easily. Who the hell is going to read her books, or Plato's books, or Shandor Marai's books, or Dostoevsky's books, if you are getting used like, the whole generation to watch 90 seconds videos. Vice has indeed interesting videos that sometimes last 15, 20 minutes. Who's going to watch that now if everyone is used, to not look at more than 1 minute and a half? And my question basically is, you TikTok, do you make people dumber or smarter?
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to surprise you here. Open TikTok and search for a hashtag called BookTok. This hashtag has over 80 billion views now. Even yesterday, I was talking to a person that is here at Brain Bar, and she mentioned her 16-year-old daughter, and the fact that thanks to TikTok, she started reading a lot more books, and also not just any kind of books, but also those that you just mentioned. So
like Zing's books.
Like Zing's books.
I didn't know my books are on BookTok. I would love that to happen.
Yeah, just put a hashtag under it, a BookTok. But yeah, it's to be honest with you, I was at the conference last month, and I checked the numbers, and it was 76 billions. And now I checked the numbers, and it's now over 80 billions. So I think there is a significant impact, positive impact on TikTok, also on the readership. Like the CEO of Barnes & Nobles, he mentioned that the #1 factor driving book sales now in the States is TikTok.
Good news?
I think it's different, right?
Zing?
So, you talk about this attention span thing. Would any of you be happy if you watched a 30-second cut down of the new Marvel film, or would you want to watch the full film? It's different. It's a completely different medium. Yes, it scratches an itch if you watch like 30-second videos for 4 hours a day, but at the end of the day, it doesn't stop you from going to the cinema. You don't. When someone asks you to go to watch a film, you don't go, "Oh, sorry, I've already watched 3 hours of TikTok. I'm kind of fine." Like it doesn't. The human brain doesn't really work that way.
Human brains can be shaped also by technologies, and when you see, for example, like the very blunt results on reading, math, and things like that, like the PISA results, what we see in the Western world is they're dropping. When I speak to teachers, they tell me like it's very complicated for me to get a student to be concentrated on more than 2 pages, for example. And my guess is that in 20 years, the real intellectuals will read comic strips, and no one will read Plato anymore. So that's, I think, it's also a risk. And again, we can even dinosaurs like me can see it. For me, it was easier to read Dostoevsky when I was 20 than now that I'm 44. I disclose my age. We have a question, please.
Hello, thank you very much. My name is Peter, and I'm a student. And I would like to ask a question about TikTok's age restrictions. And we all know that kids much younger than the legal age of TikTok usage are using it. And I would like to ask, what's your opinion? How does this affect young children? And what can the platform do to make the restrictions stronger for kids not to be able to use the platform? Thank you.
This is a very serious issue. This is a super important issue for us. So let me tell you what we do. So one, if you're not allowed on TikTok if you are under 13 years old. But if you do and you lie on your age restriction, then there is an algorithm that actually checks your level of the number of use and terms that you use and whether it's something that a person over 13 should have. If you're not, then the algorithm catches you and block the account. That's one. Now, people between 13 and 16, they have account settings on private by default. What that means is that you cannot send an audio and video attachment in a message in order to prevent sexting. You cannot download the video of this person. This person cannot run a live. And also, as an advertiser, there is no possibility to direct ads to those kids. We are also working on something that's called age-appropriate design code, which would mean that there are different settings for people between 13 and 15 and 17, because this is something that tech platforms didn't recognize before, that this is actually a substantive difference between when you are 13 to 15 and 15 to 17. There's also a lot of research that we do. I'm happy to take it offline. That's one of my favorite topics, child safety, because there are also parents at TikTok, and this is in our interest. But there's research on how you should talk to your kids in terms of how to prevent them being on TikTok or how, in general, how they enter this online sphere.
Things you want to react quickly?
Yeah, I
Very,
mean, it's
very
really,
quickly.
it's interesting because it goes back to my point about, is it right? Like with LGBTQ education, for instance, would you be happy to have an LGBTQ content creator talking to someone who's 13 years old, 14 years old, 15 years old, 16 years old? Like, where do you draw the boundaries? And it's really interesting to hear you talk about this because it's like, who are the experts you're talking to about this? Are you talking to child psychologists, developmental psychologists who are able to tell you this is how much maturity children have at a certain age?
Yeah, so this is exactly it. That's why we do not decide on having answers on those issues. We do work with external experts, like you said, child psychologist experts, university experts, to help us to develop those solutions.
Ladies and gentlemen, I was told to keep the timing very, very strict, but I cannot resist.
Last
I cannot
question.
resist indeed the temptation of giving the floor for a very quick question and an extremely quick answer, like the less than a TikTok video, please.
I'll be very quick. What's the future of state legislation and social media platforms like TikTok?
Quick answer to that. Okay. Well, to be very brief, I think that the tech platforms finally understand that they need to work with a broader audience, and every actor on the scene counts, whether it's the regulators, whether it's NGOs, whether it's the third parties, academics, etc. And we need to remember that tech platforms right now and social media, they're part of something bigger, right? The new generation, they don't consider offline and online, they consider it as a hybrid, as one, and we should also treat it as one, and that's why we should put it in a broader spectrum and engage all the actors on the scene.
Thank you. That was indeed short enough. Thank you very much. Loud round of applause for our two speakers. Thank you very much.